Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where I cover missing persons, unsolved cases, crime news, and more. I have been working on this case. It's not really a cold case. It's a case that is actually still being investigated, oddly enough. It's local to me, first off, and it is going to appear tomorrow evening or today, depending upon when you are listening, watching this video on the ID channel with Alana Burrows on her CSI program, which I will link in the information of this video. I highly respect her. For those not aware of Alana Burrows, she was a former CSI investigator. She prominently worked on many cases. Most known, especially around here in Central Florida, is the Casey Anthony case. Caylee Anthony's death. So that was like her first case, what have you, that she did a couple years ago on her initial show. She's had a couple shows at this point, and again, I'll include the information for tomorrow, Wednesday night show, as well as her Instagram and Facebook and all that sort of stuff, because she is an awesome person. I love watching her on ID channel. Anyhow, this is Tommy Zeigler, and this is going to be a piece from WESH 2. This is a local news station to us here in Orlando, Central Florida. This is a case that happened 4 decades ago, and I'm still tearing into a lot of details. So I'm going to kind of cover some basics, and then we're going to come back to it in the next few days. Basically, in 1975, William Thomas, otherwise known as Tommy Zeigler, he was a successful businessman. He owned W.T. Zeigler Furniture Store in Winter Garden, Florida. Tommy was also a well-known community leader and a family man, so he was very well respected and known in the community. On Christmas Eve, now this happened on December 24th, 1975, along with his wife Eunice, her parents Perry and Virginia Edwards, and customer Charlie Mays. They were found inside of his furniture store after a horrific robbery. All of these people, except for Tommy, were found deceased at the scene. He was taken to the hospital and rushed into surgery for a gunshot wound, and this gunshot wound was actually very inches from actually killing him as well. His wife, her parents, as well as Charlie Mays, who was, like again I said, he's a well-known credit customer of the store, were all shot, and the 2 men had also been beaten badly. So not only were they all shot, both Charlie Mays and the father-in-law were beaten as well as shot. And there was about 2 or 3 weapons used, it seems to be. Now, the crime scene was a complicated mess of evidence for detectives to examine. And you have to imagine, this is like 44 years ago. Okay, so this is the mid-70s, very early on. You know, there's still a lot of this technology that we know now is just not present. There were pools of blood in various locations throughout the store, including bloody footprints, discarded guns, and the bodies were all found in different locations. There was also a trail of blood leading from the telephone that Tommy used to call for help to the chair in which he sat in, awaiting for the help to arrive. Detective Donald Fry came to the conclusion, he was the head detective investigator, he's the one that came to the conclusion that Tommy was the prime suspect. He believed that the lone survivor shot himself in the abdomen after placing that call for help. Now, Detective Fry's theory was focused on Zeigler, and he was determined to prove it after what happened that night. So because of this, because of his narrow-minded focus, Detective Fry's narrow-minded focus on Tommy, Fry failed to truly examine and look into all of the available evidence. So that's a major fail for a detective. A number of experts have spoken out about how the case and the evidence was not properly processed nor handled properly. Orange County Sheriff's Office was so focused on Zeigler's guilt and that the ball was probably dropped in this case. The basically new evidence has surfaced over the last few years that could vindicate Tommy Zeigler, that being DNA. Okay, there's much more to it, but DNA is the major key here. They did not have that kind of technology in 1975 to test DNA. So let's watch this clip right here from WESH 2 before I continue to discuss the case.
Tommy Zeigler has been on death row for decades, convicted of killing his wife, in-laws, and another man in the family's furniture store in 1975. From day one, Zeigler said he did not do it.
I'm not guilty of what I'm charged with.
And soon he will get his chance to possibly prove it through DNA testing. State Attorney Monique Worrell has agreed to support Zeigler's request to have his DNA tested, a request Zeigler's attorneys have made many times.
If we test this DNA, we will find out who the killer was.
The state attorney told me she agreed in essence because the case is so old and the technology has advanced so much that everything must be done to prove whether Zeigler is guilty or innocent, that every case deserves this, but with Zeigler, his life hangs in the balance. The quadruple murder happened in 1975 at a time when mass murders were rare. The public was horrified. Zeigler said a stranger came into the store, hit him over the head, shot him in the stomach, and that the stranger shot his wife, her parents, and a customer in their Winter Garden furniture store on Christmas Eve. Detectives described it as a bloodbath. The state attorney tells me that a judge must approve this request, and if and when that happens, everything in the evidence locker connected to this case will be released. Michelle Meredith, WESH 2 News.
Now, this is September 2023. They actually just had another hearing, I think in June, July. There's over 300, I believe it's like 329, something into that effect, of pieces of evidence that could be retested for DNA and what have you. So, again, I think that this poor man, this guy's been in jail. He's 81 years old at this point. He's not going to have any kind of a great life. His main goal right now is to clear his name. And I am completely on his side, and I think that there is a lot of questions. Now, I'm going to go over parts of this now, and like I said, this is going to be quite a few videos because, like I said, there's so much pieces of evidence in this case. There's so many stories, and it's like 1975, it was quite a different time. I wasn't even born yet when this happened. So, now, 2 witnesses came forward hours after the murders. Their names were Edward Williams and Felton Thomas. They both directly implicated Tommy Zeigler as the killer. Thomas informed Detective Fry that Zeigler was meeting with Charlie Mays. Now, that's the customer. Now, he is the black customer. That evening at 7:30 p.m. to pick up a used TV from the store. Now, Williams stated that Tommy asked him to help deliver some Christmas presents that night. Zeigler was supposed to meet Williams at his home, at Zeigler's home, at 7:30 p.m. And all these times, they get a little bit hairy as well. So it's something, like I said, we're going to have to go over this stuff and go over it again because I've compiled it and I still have to go back and stare at it again. Now here is Detective Fry's theory after combining the statements from both witnesses. Again, Fry went into the scene, took a look at it, immediately snapped his fingers and said, you know what? Tommy did this. These two particular quote-unquote witnesses, they gave him what they need. Basically gave him the justification that he needed, and Detective Fry totally did not do a damn thing else for this case, as far as I'm concerned. Now, according to Detective Fry, his timeline is something like this for what happened on December 24th, 1975. Between 7 p.m. and 7:24 p.m. Now, this is the window when Tommy murdered his wife, Eunice. Then her parents, Perry and Virginia Edwards. A bullet was discovered lodged into the wall clock, leaving the time to read 7:24 p.m. So again, there's a wall clock on the wall, and a bullet hit it. So that 7:24 p.m. time, I do think that is very valid, although I don't believe that it has to do anything to do with this particular timeline that Fry has thrown at the courts, and sadly, they all believed it. Then 7:30 p.m., Felton Thomas. He arrived at the furniture store with Charlie Mays to pick up the television. He claims that a white man named Tommy approached the two men. So that would be Tommy Zeigler, okay? Zeigler then suggested that they all go for a drive. Christmas Eve? Okay. The trio drove to a orange grove nearby, which is where Zeigler presented 3 guns to Thomas and Mays. He invited them to fire them outside in the grove. So the men decided, okay, sure, why not? They took the guns and they fired them. Detective Fry thought that this was some sort of ploy to get the men's fingerprints onto the weapons. But that doesn't really work, because when the guns were located later, they were all wiped clean. So that particular theory that Fry had, totally unfounded. Okay? And then Thomas's story went on to state that the 3 men then returned to the store to get the television. Zeigler discovered that he did not have his keys, so he tried to break into the store. This made Mays nervous, according to Thomas, so they all drove to Zeigler's house to get another set of keys. During this time, Williams was supposedly, this is the other witness, remember, Williams, he was supposedly waiting outside of the Zeigler home in his truck. About 7:50 p.m., Williams stated he spotted Zeigler arrive with these 2 men inside of his vehicle. Zeigler entered his garage to retrieve a box of ammunition. According to Williams, Zeigler asked him to give him a few more minutes. Okay? Zeigler, Thomas, and Mays then left and returned to the furniture store. Mays entered with Zeigler, but Thomas became nervous and decided to leave. So he came to help get this TV with Charlie Mays, but he apparently got nervous and left. That's according to this supposed witness. Fry thinks he got back into his car and then returned to his home to meet back up with Williams, who was still waiting back there. Once Zeigler arrived back home, he wiped down his car and then went with Williams back to the furniture store. Back at the furniture store, Zeigler entered his store first, and then, Williams came behind him, and he saw Zeigler reapproaching him with a gun in his hand. Now, Williams said he was afraid and claims Tommy Zeigler pointed the gun at him and pulled the trigger 3 times. And they found out the weapon was empty. According to Williams' story, Zeigler then handed him the gun. He somehow managed to flee the store and headed to a restaurant across the street from the store. It is assumed by Detective Fry the time was approximately 8:50 by that point. A failed attempt to call the police from a phone inside of the restaurant by Williams, who then left and headed to Orlando. See, that particular part of the story totally doesn't fly with me. There's just too many red flags there. About half an hour later, Zeigler made the phone call to his friend, Don Fick, who is with the local law enforcement. he was at a Christmas party that he was also supposed to be at with his wife. So the Zeiglers were supposed to go to this party, and he told him that they had a robbery at his furniture store. Later, Williams surrendered the gun to the police, claiming it was the weapon that Tommy Zeigler gave him that night. It was later identified as the murder weapon that killed both Perry and Virginia Edwards. That is his wife's mother and father, his father and mother-in-law. The version of events that Fry came up with would require an hours-long, complex strategy planned down to the last minute. For instance, the whole plan would have fallen apart if Charlie Mays had arrived 6 minutes earlier. It's difficult to believe that such a crime, in which Detective Fry would later claim had been plotted for many months, would be attempted so haphazardly. So, there's just too many holes in Detective Fry's theory, and doesn't make sense. Now, Tommy Zeigler's account. Now, there's a much simpler explanation which fits the evidence. This explanation has never been altered nor contradicted, and was never looked into by Detective Fry. This is Zeigler's own account. His recollections of that night as told to his defense attorney, Terry Hadley, just a few days after the murders, once he had recovered from his surgery. Tommy says he and his wife Eunice were planning to give her parents a reclining chair that Christmas. She and the Edwards had gone to the store to pick out the chair that evening. Meanwhile, Zeigler waited for Edward Williams to arrive and help him with his deliveries. Now, Zeigler had arrived to meet Williams at 7 p.m. at the Zeigler house. Williams ended up being late, and when he arrived, they drove to the store in Williams's truck. Tommy entered the darkened store ahead of Williams and tried to turn on the lights. Later, it was discovered that a breaker was shut off, so thus there was no power for the lights. He was assaulted by two men. The physician's testimony corroborated a lump on the back of Tommy's head. He lost his glasses and was unable to see well in the darkness. Zeigler's broken pair of glasses was later found in the store. He says he may have fired one shot in self-defense with his .22 that he wore, but this gun jammed on him. He threw it at the assailants, and then he retrieved a .357 Colt pistol that he kept in a drawer nearby. He says he may have fired shots with this, though he's unclear on how many, before he was shot and knocked to the floor, and then he went unconscious. When he regained consciousness, his assailants had left the store. He crawled around the store, eventually found the phone, and that's when he called Don Fick, who was at that party. Before the trial, Zeigler's attorneys wanted to confirm his story in their own minds and hoped to bring out more details of his traumatic encounter. They took him to a psychiatric clinic near Tampa. There, Dr. Theodore Mackler conducted an interview with Zeigler while he was under the influence of the drug sodium brevital. I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly. Again, I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on TV. The interview supported Zeigler's story with an addition. In this subconscious state, he remembered a white man's voice say, "Mays has been hit, we'll have to get rid of him." The cause of Mays' death was not his gunshot wound, but being beaten over the head with a linoleum crank. Dr. Mackler is convinced that Tommy Zeigler was telling the truth during the interview. And this is coming from a doctor, an expert. Now, Zeigler's attorneys had the arduous task of convincing a jury that Tommy did not commit these crimes, but was the victim of a robbery and perhaps something more sinister. Zeigler was actively involved in trying to clean up corruption in Winter Garden at the time and claimed to have witnessed the operations of a loan sharking ring that victimized migrant workers. Just 6 months earlier, he had also helped an African-American bar owner retain his valuable liquor license when the owner was being pressured to sell. There were allegations that the owner, Andrew James, had offered to sell drugs to an undercover agent for the Beverage Commission. Zeigler believed this was only part of an attempt to revoke James's license and testified as a character witness for him. His testimony seriously challenged the veracity of Baker, the undercover agent. He made him look bad. So, yeah, they're not happy with him. Baker had his own character witnesses, Judge Maurice M. Paul, who would 6 months later preside over the murder trial of Tommy Zeigler himself. So there you go, full circle. Looking at the evidence, well, as discovered in 1987 under the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, in the Orange County files, some evidence was withheld from the defense. Other items were turned over to the defense too late to be processed for the trial, despite repeated requests by the defense. Bullets were not labeled, a lift made from a bloody footprint was lost. Conveniently, huh? The FBI shredded partial prints taken from the store, and the weapons, the evidence that might have cleared Zeigler, was just gone. Yeah, coincidences, huh? Oops, we lost it. I don't know where it went. Yeah, I'm not buying it. Charlie Mays' van, found parked behind the furniture store on the other side of a 6-foot-tall fence, was never processed for evidence. Despite the van's curious location, prosecution witness Felton Thomas claimed he had gone with Mays to the store that night to pick up a large console television set. He said that he and Charlie Mays were alone in the van. However, after reading an article about the Zeigler case in 1986, a woman named Barbara Skipper came forward with the information that she sold a large gas cylinder to Charlie Mays that evening. Interesting timing, huh? She also said there were 2 other black males with him in the van. Seems like a lot of coincidences, huh? Now, a tooth that was lying on Charlie Mays' parka was lost. At trial, a forensic dentist testified from a photo that this tooth was not from Zeigler or any of the victims. An expanded cartridge case was found on the scene, and it didn't match any of the guns that were also found at the crime scene. Now, that's odd, too. Again, how many red flags and oddities do we have now? I think I'm losing count. Most devastating to Zeigler's defense was the blood was not subtyped. Test results would have proven who did what to whom. For example, Charlie Mays' feet were covered in blood. Knowing whose blood was on his shoes would have been valuable to the defense team. Although there were over 60 pieces of crime evidence stored, besides the evidence sent to the FBI, the defense was consistently prevented from timely examination. The state also failed to test the blood-covered clothes and shoes of Charlie Mays, as well as Perry Edwards' clothes. A lot going against Zeigler here, guys. A lot. Edward Williams' trousers were not tested either for gunpowder residue, even though he claimed to put a gun in his pocket. The gun that the state claimed Zeigler used to kill 2 people. The trousers were turned over to the defense just 2 weeks before the trial started. Testing showed no residue in the pockets, but the results came in too late to use at the trial. A gunshot residue test conducted on Tommy Zeigler's trousers produced a negative finding, though the state said he had fired 28 shots from various guns. The state failed to disclose this negative report in its discovery. What a coincidence, huh? Oops, we forgot to tell you that part. Witness Felton Thomas told Fry that he'd never met Tommy Zeigler before the night of the murders. Now, Zeigler maintains they had never met until his trial. Someone's lying, huh? Although Thomas's testimony seriously implicated Zeigler as the murderer, Fry's team never pressed him for a full description of the man he claimed Mays told him was Zeigler. When he did provide a threadbare description, he was off by 2 obvious points: what Zeigler was wearing and what car he was actually driving. Thomas's description was wrong, even though he claimed to have spent at least 20 minutes driving around with Zeigler. If you're in someone's car for 20 minutes, don't you think you're going to know what kind of car you're in? I think you probably would. Notably, neither Thomas nor Williams reported having seen the large amount of blood that was on Zeigler's shirt when he was found wounded at the store. Yet, by the time Thomas saw him, Zeigler had supposedly murdered 3 people. By the time Williams drove with Zeigler to the store, he would have had to murder all 4 people, all 4 victims. Edward Williams' testimony was contradicted by a number of witnesses. In particular, the clothes he claimed to be wearing and handed in for forensic tests came into question. For example, Williams claims he ran across the street to the restaurant to phone the police immediately after he says he saw Tommy Zeigler try to shoot him. However, witnesses said that after they watched Zeigler taken to the hospital, they saw a black man come into the restaurant to use the phone. According to the state's theory, during that time period, Zeigler would have had to attempt to shoot Williams, move Williams' truck. It was not found where Williams claims he left it, wipe it clean of all the fingerprints, and bend a prong on the gate. Then, he would have had to go back into the store, call for help, shoot himself in the abdomen, wait for the police to arrive, to be examined by Chief Thompson, and carried to his car and be driven away. Indeed, if the witnesses were telling the truth, no one suggested they were doing anything other than independent witnesses, so they just said, well, they just happened to see it. Then the logical conclusion is Zeigler was shot before Williams left the store. The testimony considered with the police log showed the timing of evidence proves Zeigler's innocence. So now we've got Detective Fry's side of the quote-unquote story, his theory, and then you got the defense's side. And Tommy's always said, I'm innocent, I didn't do this. And with the time frame there and the lack of evidence on Tommy, too many questions there, folks. Too many questions. Sadly, when the case got to the jury, even with all the withheld evidence and the judge's obvious support of the prosecution, which was observed by several people attending the trial and confirmed in 4 interviews with jurors later, the jurors' first vote was 6 to convict and 6 to acquit. So they were half and half. Eventually, the 6 who wanted to acquit were swayed toward a guilty vote, except for Irma Brickell. She held out under much persecution from some of the other jurors and passed out twice from the pressure. Yeah, that's some screwed up stuff, guys. She sent Judge Paul several notes trying to get his help and to let him know what was going on in that jury room. He would not see her for fear of a mistrial and eventually contacted Mrs. Brickell's doctor, who prescribed Valium for her. Yeah, that's not weird or anything, right? After she took the Valium, she could no longer hold out. Though she voted guilty, she's gone on a national television program to say that she still does not believe Tommy Zeigler is guilty. Recently, another juror has come out admitting to also taking Valium during deliberations. Corruption from the get-go, folks. And I'm telling you, that judge has got a hand in it. Since 1976, startling new evidence has come forth. Ken and Linda Roach say they called the Orange County Sheriff's Office to tell them what they saw and what they heard on December 24th, 1975. But we're told their information wasn't needed. Of course, they don't want to have to open up the case again. We're done with that one, guys. Move along. In 1979, still troubled by what they knew, they contacted the defense directly to say that while driving past the furniture store, they heard sounds of many exploding firecrackers. They also observed a black male walking in front of the store at the time and saw 4 cars parked in front of the store instead of the 2 present after the crime. Wonder who the other 2 were, huh? This testimony corroborates Tommy Zeigler's version of events and destroys the prosecution's theory of a lone gunman. Totally destroys Detective Fry and the state's theories. It's not going on, buddy. Not with these 2. As a result of the 1987 discovery motion by the defense, There surfaced a 15-page report submitted by the police officer first on the scene. In this longer report, the officer states that the blood on Zeigler was dry when he found him. Yet, the state claimed Zeigler had shot himself just a few minutes before. How could it be dry if he just shot himself? Yeah, that's just this. It's either wet or it's dry, guys. Next to emerge was a taped interview between the state's investigator and a young man whose family had been staying in the Winter Garden Inn behind the furniture store that night. The young man explained to the investigator that he and his family had observed a police car and an officer with a gun drawn leaning over the car's hood before they heard shots. The investigator told the young man that this information would not be helpful to them, but he offered the family a, quote, free trip back to Florida, unquote, if they decided they heard the shots before they saw the policeman. Woo! Talk about corruption city. Telling you, it's all harking back to the whole situation he got involved with, trying to be a good local advocate, businessman. Telling you, Zeigler just unfortunately got wrong. People just didn't like him. I think he was completely set up. In 1982, grocery store manager Ed Rowe signed an affidavit detailing a discussion he had with Charlie Mays' son, Ernie, who denied the conversation ever took place. Later, 7 years after the murders, Rowe claimed that the son, Ernie, told him his father left their home that night with a pistol in his coat, telling his family there would be money for Christmas. How would that be? Think he might be trying to rob a certain furniture store? Rowe quotes Ernie Mays as saying, "My father wasn't supposed to die that night. Tommy Zeigler was supposed to die." Yeah. So, again, there's just so much here. And I'm just scratching the surface, guys. I am just scratching the surface. I think that this has to do with Tommy getting the wrong people pissed off at him. And I think that he was completely set up. That's what I believe. This man has been in jail, like I said, over 40 years now. 44, 45 years. Again, math was not my forte in school. But he's been there for over 4 decades. And he has never wavered on his story. I believe him. And I really hope that they're finally going to get their butts in gear and get this DNA checked. And I really think there's a lot they need to look into. What was going on with this judge? What was going on with was there corruption inside the sheriff's office at this time? Local PD? Seems to me something else was going on. And I don't think it was just 1 or 2 people. I think it was a lot of people. And they set up this one innocent man who all he wanted to do was run his furniture store, be with his wife, and help out his community. And guess where he's been for the last over 40 years? He's sitting in death row here in the state of Florida. So, again, this one has gotten me on fire. It's an older case. But I really would love to see this man, I really would like to see him come out and they decide, hey, he's not guilty and clear his name. He deserves that at the very least. They can't give him back his, the last 40 some odd years of his life. They just can't do that. And that's really sad. They can't give him back his wife. None of that stuff. But what they can do is clear his name. Let me know what you guys think of this one. Again, I'll be covering it much more in depth soon, but that was kind of like the basics of it. And with that said, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and most of all, stay safe.